You worked for this moment. You told yourself it was coming. You did everything right. You stayed late. You delivered results. You handled situations no one else wanted to touch. And then one morning, the call came. The email arrived. The meeting happened. They looked at you across the table and said the words you had been waiting years to hear. You got the promotion, more money, a better title, a seat at a table you used to watch from a distance. You went home that night and you felt something that surprised you. Not just happiness, not just relief, something that felt close to arrival, like you had finally crossed a line that mattered. And for a few weeks, maybe even a few months, it felt like that. It felt like reward. It felt like proof that the sacrifice was worth it, proof that the patience paid off. And then something started to shift, quietly at first. The mornings got harder to enter. The evenings stopped feeling like rest. Your mind was still at the office when you were sitting at your dinner table. Your family was in the room with you, but you were somewhere else entirely. The stress that used to arrive at work began following you home like a shadow you could not shake. And you started asking a question you never expected to ask. You started asking whether the promotion was a mistake. You are not alone in that question. And today, I want to sit with you inside that question. Because what most people experience after promotion is not ingratitude. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is a collision between new weight and old structure. And if you do not understand the architecture behind that collision, you will keep repeating the same pattern. You will keep chasing the next level, and the next level will keep breaking you. So let us begin. My name is Rabbi Shimon. I study structure. I study the architecture of a life. Not feelings, not emotion. Structure, the bones of how a life holds together under weight. And today we are going to examine a hidden law that most successful people never encounter until it's too late. We're going to examine the law of promotion, not promotion as a reward, not promotion as a milestone, but promotion as a structural test, a test that exposes what is underneath, a test that reveals whether the foundation you have built is strong enough to carry the load that comes next. 4 sections. That is how we will walk through this. First, we will examine the illusion of promotion, what most people believe it means, and why that belief sets them up for collapse. Second, we will examine the law of capacity, how every life has structural limits, and how promotion, when it arrives before those limits have been expanded, becomes a destabilizing force rather than a blessing. Third, we will examine why promotions collapse people, the patterns, the warning signs, the quiet erosion that happens before a man realizes what has gone wrong. And fourth, we will examine the hidden governance law, the ancient structural principle that separates people who can hold their success from those who cannot. Let us move into the first section, the illusion of promotion. This is where we need to be very precise, because the illusion is not obvious. It does not announce itself. It is embedded inside a belief that almost every serious person carries. And the belief sounds like this: promotion means you have arrived. Promotion means you have grown. Promotion means the struggle is over and the reward has begun. That is the story we tell ourselves. That is the story the culture reinforces. From the time we are children, we are taught that working hard leads to promotion, and that promotion leads to a better life, more peace, more stability, more everything. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. It sounds like a fair equation. You give more, you receive more. But here's what the equation leaves out. Promotion does not only multiply what you receive. Promotion multiplies everything. Responsibility increases. visibility increases. The number of decisions landing on your desk increases. Expectations rise. And the speed at which consequences arrive when things go wrong increases as well. Promotion is not primarily a reward. Promotion is primarily a load increase. And most people never think about it that way because they were only preparing for one side of the equation. They were preparing for income. They were not preparing for structural load. Think about what happens when a building engineer adds floors to a structure. You cannot simply build upward without first examining what is below. The foundation determines how many floors the building can support. If the foundation is weak and you add floors anyway, the building does not collapse immediately. It shows stress gradually, small cracks in unexpected places, doors that no longer close properly, floors that begin to feel unstable underfoot, and eventually the whole structure fails, not because the additional floors were wrong, but because the foundation was never built to carry them. That is exactly what happens to a person after premature promotion. The life begins to show cracks, not in obvious places at first, in the quiet places, in the private places, in the places only you can see. And the man stands inside that cracking structure and asks himself the wrong question. He asks whether he deserved the promotion, when the real question is whether his structure was ready to carry it. That distinction matters enormously because one question produces shame and the other question produces direction. Shame keeps you stuck. Direction moves you forward. So let us be very clear right now. The promotion did not break you because you were not good enough. The promotion revealed a capacity gap that already existed. That gap was always there. The promotion simply made it visible. Now let us move into the second section, the law of capacity. Every life has a structural capacity. This is not an opinion. This is an observable law, and once you see it clearly, you will never look at success the same way again. Let me explain what I mean by structural capacity. Every man or woman who is operating in a professional or leadership context is carrying a certain amount of load on a daily basis. That load includes decisions. How many decisions you must make. How consequential those decisions are. How fast you must make them and with how little information. That load includes responsibility. Who depends on you? How many people? How directly? What happens to them when you get it wrong? That load includes stress. The ambient pressure of operating at a certain level, the pressure of performance expectations, the pressure of organizational visibility, the pressure of economic stakes, and that load includes expectation. What your organization expects from you, what your family expects from you, what you expect from yourself. Now here is the critical principle. Every person has a current threshold for carrying that load. Some people can carry a great deal, some people can carry less. Neither is a moral judgment. Both are structural realities, and the threshold is not fixed. It can be expanded, but expansion must happen deliberately, through training, through practice, through the development of specific internal systems. Through experience and reflection and intentional growth. The problem is this. Most people do not expand their capacity deliberately. They expand it accidentally, or they do not expand it at all. They simply assume that wanting more responsibility means they are ready for more responsibility. And that assumption is the source of most leadership collapse that I observe. Promotion multiplies load. That is the first fact. The second fact is that most people arrive at promotion with a capacity threshold that was built for the previous level, not the new one. And when those two facts collide, when increased load meets unchanged capacity, something very specific happens. The system begins to strain, and the strain shows up in completely predictable ways. It shows up as decision fatigue. You notice you are making worse decisions at the end of the day than at the beginning. You notice that choices that should be straightforward feel exhausting. You notice that you are second-guessing yourself more than you used to. It shows up as time compression. You feel like you have less time than you did before the promotion. Even though nothing in the calendar is fundamentally changed, everything feels urgent. Everything feels like it needs you right now. And the feeling of urgency becomes a permanent atmospheric condition rather than an occasional state. It shows up as emotional blunting. You become less available to the people around you. Not because you love them less, but because the load is consuming the bandwidth that emotional presence requires. Your family gets what is left, and what is left is increasingly thin. Now, here is the moment where I need to stop and be very precise about something. The law of capacity is not about finding your limit and staying below it forever. That is not what I am teaching. What I am teaching is that capacity must be expanded before load is increased. Not after, before. This is the sequence that almost everyone gets backwards. Most people increase the load through promotion or new responsibility, and then they try to scramble and expand their capacity while the load is already crushing them. That is like trying to reinforce a foundation while the building above it is collapsing. It does not work well. It is possible, but it is painful, and it is far less effective than the alternative. The alternative is building the capacity first, deliberately, intentionally, before the weight arrives. And that is not weakness. That is engineering. That is wisdom. That is what separates people who sustain their success from people who burn through it. Now let us enter the third section. Why promotions collapse people. I want to walk you through the actual collapse sequence, because most people experience these patterns without having language for them. And when you have no language for something, you cannot diagnose it. And when you cannot diagnose it, you cannot address it. So let us give this process language. The collapse does not happen all at once. It happens in stages. And each stage has a character, a texture, a feel that is recognizable once you know what you are looking for. The first stage is the honeymoon compression. This is the early period after promotion where everything feels simultaneously exciting and slightly overwhelming. The new responsibilities feel stimulating. The new access feels validating. The new income feels significant. But underneath that excitement, there is already a pressure building. There are more meetings, more emails, more people waiting for your input, more decisions sitting in your queue. And because everything feels new and important, you tell yourself the pressure is normal. You tell yourself you're just getting settled, and that is partially true. Adjustment is real, but the compression is also real. And in this stage, most people do not take the warning seriously. They push through, they perform, they tell their spouse and their friends that it is intense right now, but it will settle down. It does not settle down. It becomes the new baseline. The second stage is the depletion phase. This is where the structural mismatch starts to show real consequences. The decisions that were once easy now require more deliberate effort. The sleep is less restorative because the mind does not fully disengage. The body carries tension that it used to release at the end of the workday, and the emotional reserves that a person relies on for patience and presence and creativity begin to run low. Not empty, just low enough that everything requires more effort than it used to. In the depletion phase, a man still looks functional from the outside. He is still performing. He is still showing up. but inside he is aware that he is operating on a narrower margin. He is aware that he is closer to the edge than he used to be, and he begins to feel something that is very specific, a quiet resentment toward the very promotion he worked so hard to earn. He does not say this out loud. He might barely admit it to himself, but it is there, a low-level feeling that something was taken from him in exchange for something he thought he was receiving. The third stage is the fracture. This is where the pressure finds the weakest point in the structure and pushes through it. The fracture looks different for different people. For one man, it is the marriage. The accumulated distance between himself and his wife reaches a point where it cannot be quietly managed anymore. A conversation happens, or does not happen, and the silence becomes defining. For another man, it is the body. The stress that was being absorbed internally begins to express itself physically. Sleep disorders, weight changes, persistent fatigue, things that require medical attention, but are really structural signals. For another man, it is the work itself. The performance that once came naturally begins to require unsustainable effort. Mistakes happen. Visibility increases the cost of those mistakes. Confidence begins to erode. And for some men, the fracture is internal and invisible. It is the quiet realization that they have built a life they no longer want to live, that the destination they were driving toward has turned out to be somewhere they did not want to arrive. That is the fracture that takes the longest to recover from, because it requires not just structural repair. It requires a fundamental re-examination of purpose. Now I want to pause here because I think some of you are listening to this and recognizing yourself in these stages. And I want to say something specific to you before we continue. The fact that you are at the depletion phase or even the fracture phase does not mean you failed. It means you received a load that your current structure was not yet built to carry. And that is correctable, but it requires honesty. It requires the willingness to examine the structure instead of just pushing harder through the load. Pushing harder is not always the answer. Sometimes the answer is to stop, inspect, reinforce, and then continue. Which brings me to the moment I want to speak directly to you. If you cannot measure your vessel, you cannot expand it. Do not attempt to build until you have been inspected. The vessel inspection protocol is linked below. Download it before you continue. I am serious about that. What I am giving you in this teaching is the conceptual architecture. But architecture without tools is incomplete. The vessel inspection protocol gives you the practical instrument, the specific questions that allow you to measure your current structural capacity accurately. Not how you wish it were, not how it looks from the outside, how it actually is, because you cannot expand something you have not measured. You cannot reinforce something you have not located. Download it, work through it honestly, and then come back to this teaching. Let us now enter the fourth and final section, the hidden governance law. I call this the governance law because governance is the right word, not management, not balance. Governance, let me explain the distinction. Management is about handling what is in front of you. Governance is about designing the systems that determine what arrives in front of you and under what conditions. A manager responds, a governor designs, and the hidden law I am about to describe operates at the level of design, not response. Here is the law stated as plainly as I can state it. Authority requires governance. Responsibility requires capacity, and promotion without structural expansion is not advancement. It is destabilization. Let us break that down carefully. When we say authority requires governance, we are saying that every level of authority that a person carries must be matched by an equivalent level of internal and external governance systems. Internal governance includes the psychological infrastructure, the emotional regulation, the decision frameworks, the value clarity that allows a person to make consistent choices under pressure without losing their sense of direction or identity. External governance includes the operational systems, the delegation structures, the boundaries, the time architectures, the communication protocols that allow a person to manage expanded responsibility without having to manually hold every thread themselves. When a person is promoted and their authority increases without a corresponding increase in governance capacity, two things happen simultaneously. First, the authority becomes chaotic. Decisions get made reactively instead of strategically. Resources get allocated inconsistently. The people who report to that person feel the instability even if they cannot name it. They sense that the person at the top is operating under too much pressure to think clearly, and that sensing erodes trust, slowly but measurably. Second, the person holding the authority begins to experience something I describe as governance anxiety, a persistent background feeling that things are slightly out of control, that there are threads being dropped somewhere, that they are moving from fire to fire without ever fully addressing the deeper conditions that keep producing the fires. Governance anxiety is exhausting in a very specific way. It does not exhaust the muscles, it exhausts the mind. The constant low-level monitoring of everything. The inability to fully rest because the subconscious is still scanning for problems. The feeling that any moment of stillness is actually a moment of neglect. Governance anxiety drives a very particular kind of behavioral response. It drives the need to be present everywhere at all times. It drives the inability to delegate because trust requires confidence, and confidence requires clarity, and clarity requires governance systems that are not yet in place. It drives the extension of working hours, not because the work genuinely requires those hours, but because the absence of structure means the work expands to fill all available time. And if that sounds familiar to you, I want you to hear what I am about to say very carefully. The solution is not more effort. The solution is structure. The solution is governance. You do not solve a governance crisis by working harder. You solve a governance crisis by pausing long enough to design the systems that allow the work to function properly without consuming all of you. Now, let us talk about what structural expansion actually requires, because I do not want to leave you with a principle without a pathway. Structural expansion happens in 3 domains simultaneously. If you expand in only one domain, the structure remains unstable. All 3 must be addressed. The first domain is internal capacity. This is the internal architecture of the person, the ability to stay calm when pressure rises, the ability to think clearly when several problems compete for attention at the same time, and the ability to know exactly what matters most, so that decisions do not drain your energy every day. Knowing with such precision what you are for and what you will not compromise, that decisions that would otherwise consume enormous energy become straightforward. Internal capacity is not developed by reading about it. It is developed through deliberate practice, through reflection, through honest examination of your patterns under pressure, through learning from people who carry greater structural load than you currently do, and studying how they manage it. The second domain is operational infrastructure. This is the external architecture, your delegation systems, your meeting structures, your communication protocols, your time design. How do you protect thinking time versus reactive time? How do decisions get made at each level of the organization so that not everything escalates to you? How do you create enough white space in your schedule that you are not permanently reactive? Operational infrastructure is not glamorous work, but it is foundational work. A person who has strong internal capacity but weak operational infrastructure will still collapse, because the structural load will find its way through the operational gaps. The third domain is relational architecture. This one is often overlooked, and it is costly to overlook. Your relational architecture is the quality and structure of your closest relationships, not just at home, but everywhere. The people who speak truth to you, the people who can see your blind spots, the people who will tell you directly when you are operating poorly instead of just accommodating your dysfunction to preserve the relationship. The people who carry enough structural wisdom themselves that being in their presence actually recalibrates you. Humans are not designed to carry expanded authority alone. We were not built for isolated leadership. We were built for community, for counsel, for the kind of accountability that only comes when someone who knows you well and respects you enough to be honest looks you in the eye and says, "Something is wrong here." If you are operating without that, without genuine relational accountability, then part of your governance structure is simply absent, and the absence will cost you eventually. Now, I want to bring together everything we have discussed, because there is a thread that runs through all 4 sections of this teaching, and I want to name it explicitly. The thread is this: most of us have been trained to pursue more income, more title, more authority, more responsibility, more recognition. And that pursuit is not inherently wrong. Aspiration is not a flaw. The desire to grow is not a problem. But aspiration without architecture is dangerous, and the danger is not visible in advance. It becomes visible only under load, only when the weight arrives and the structure beneath it is tested. The man who works for years to earn a promotion has spent those years developing his competence, his technical skills, his professional knowledge, his track record, and that development is real. That competence is earned. But competence and structural capacity are not the same thing. Competence is your ability to perform a function. Structural capacity is your ability to sustain performance under expanded weight over time without losing the essential quality of your life. A man can be highly competent and structurally unprepared simultaneously, and that combination is precisely where most promotion failures originate. Not incompetence, structural unpreparedness. So the question I want to leave you sitting with before I close is not, are you competent enough for the next level? The question is this: is your structure ready to carry the load the next level brings? And if the answer is not fully, which for most honest people it is not, the follow-up question is not whether you should give up on advancement. The follow-up question is what specific structural work needs to happen before the weight arrives. Because you get to build before you carry. You get to inspect before you expand. You get to design before you commit to the load. But that opportunity only exists if you take it seriously enough to stop and do the work. Most people will not stop. The momentum of ambition is powerful. The cultural message is relentless. Keep going. Push harder. Get more. Do not slow down. And so most people will not stop to inspect the structure until the structure begins to crack under them. You have the opportunity right now to be someone who builds properly. who takes the inspection seriously, who does not wait for the crack to appear before examining the foundation. That is not weakness. That is the highest form of professional wisdom I know. The people who hold their success are not necessarily more talented than the people who collapse under it. They are more structurally prepared. They took the internal work as seriously as the external ambition. They built governance systems before the authority arrived. They expanded their relational architecture before the isolation of leadership became a burden. They designed their operational infrastructure before the load came to fill every gap in it. And they did that work not because it was exciting or comfortable. They did it because they understood the law that says promotion is not a reward for past performance. Promotion is a structural test of present capacity. And they wanted to pass the test, not just survive it, pass it. So let me close with this. Success is not dangerous. Unprepared success is dangerous. There is nothing wrong with wanting more authority. There is nothing wrong with seeking greater responsibility. There is nothing wrong with building a larger professional and financial life. But before you ask for greater responsibility, you must build a larger structure. Before you reach for a heavier load, you must inspect and expand the vessel that will carry it. Before you step into a new season of authority, you must design the governance systems that will allow you to hold that authority with integrity and consistency. This is not a slow path. This is the right path. The path that allows a man to carry his success without being broken by it. The path that allows the promotion to become what it was supposed to be from the beginning. Not a burden, a blessing. A genuine expansion of what you can do and who you are becoming. The man who walks that path does not look back on his promotion with confusion and quiet regret. He looks back on it as the confirmation of work that was done properly, work that was done in sequence. Foundation first, structure second, load third. In that order, always in that order. Take the inspection seriously. Do the structural work before the weight arrives. Build the governance systems before the authority demands them. Expand the vessel before you attempt to fill it. And then when the promotion comes, and it will come, you will not break under it. You will carry it, and so will everything and everyone that depends on you. Your soul is the blueprint. Your life is the construction. Shalom, my friend. Now let's build the life God designed for you.